Once upon a time, there lived a couple whose names were Adora and Chijioke. They had been married for 5 years, and their once warm and inviting home had now turned into a battlefield of words following the visit of Chijioke's mother. It has been 3 weeks since Chijioke's mother arrived their home, and Adora was not having it. Whilst Adora wakes up early to clean the house and get the children ready for school, her mother-in-law sleeps till it's 10 in the morning. She wakes up extremely hungry and expects Adora to have prepared breakfast for her before leaving the house for work. Adora tried to overlook it at first. She reminded herself that Mama was an elderly woman who should be respected, but as the days went by, resentment began to fester like an untreated wound. Each morning, as she rushed to prepare breakfast for her mother-in-law, whilst ensuring that the children were ready for school, Chijioke, her husband, sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the burden that she carried. Adora was so furious to see that no one was willing to help. She began to yell out angrily, accusing her husband Chijioke of being so insensitive for not agreeing to hire a housekeeper for her, and Chijioke, without thinking twice, accused her of being lazy. Only lazy and useless women hire housekeepers, he said. Why will a young woman like you be complaining of stress this early in the morning? How hard is it to make breakfast and get only two children ready for school? He asked Adora, who stood there and watched as Chijioke walked away from her, smiling at his phone as though her worries were nothing more than background noise. This was the final straw for Adora, who could not endure the neglect anymore. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, not just from exhaustion, but from the realization that her husband no longer saw her struggles or felt her pain. She clenched her fist, her breath coming in short angry bursts as Chijioke disappeared into the bedroom, leaving her there alone with her mother-in-law's demands and her own simmering frustration. Later that night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Adora knew that she had to make a choice. She could continue like this, unappreciated, unheard, and drowning in responsibilities, or she could take a stand. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual, but instead of rushing to the kitchen, she dressed up, packed a small bag, and left the house. By the time Chijioke woke up, Adora was nowhere to be found. At first, he assumed that she had gone to work early, but when his mother started complaining about breakfast, he reached for his phone to call her, only to realize that her number was now switched off. Their children were still asleep, and Chijioke did not know what to do. He got them up from bed and prepared them for school, whilst trying to prepare their lunch when his mother strolled out of her room, yawning and requesting for her breakfast. Chijioke's head pounded as his mother's voice felt like a hammer against his skull. "Where is my breakfast?" she asked nonchalantly, stretching her hands towards Chijioke, whose heart raced in anger. He barely looked at her as the children were asking for their school shoes. The kitchen was a mess. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and the smell of burnt plantain filled the entire air. His mother clapped her hands as she asked for Adora. "Where is that wife of yours? Has she finally lost her mind to be sleeping whilst the whole place is in a complete mess?" Chijioke revealed to his mother that Adora was nowhere to be found. He reached out for his phone again as he tried her number, but still it was switched off. The children tugged at his trousers, reminding him that they were late for school. His mother sighed as she sat on the couch. "You see what I was saying? This is the problem with modern wives. No patience, no endurance. She left her home just because of small stress. In my day, a woman would never complain, even when she was exhausted to her bones." Chijioke snapped. He spun around to face her. "Mama, please!" he shouted. "Enough!" His mother's mouth hung open. The children froze. Silence filled the entire house. Chijioke had never raised his voice at his mother before, but something inside him had cracked. He looked around the house. It was chaos. The dishes from last night were still in the sink. The children's lunch was incomplete. He felt like he was suffocating, and his mother was not helping matters. Chijioke quickly took the kids to school, and by the time he returned, he was so exhausted. The house was still in a mess as his mother sat comfortably on the couch, fanning herself lazily. She had made no effort to clean, no effort to help. Instead, she sighed dramatically and muttered, "You see why I said you should marry a proper wife? A woman who knows her duty." Chijioke sighed as he dropped his keys on the table. "Mama, please, I don't have strength for this," he said. His mother laughed and informed him that she had the perfect solution. The next evening, Chijioke returned home from work to meet a beautiful young woman who was sitting close to his mother and smiling. She sat with her hands folded in her lap as she lowered her eyes in submission. His mother beamed with pride. "Her name is Olamma, a proper village girl, respectful, hardworking. She will take care of you and the children, unlike that ungrateful woman who abandoned her home." Chijioke stared at the strange girl, his heart heavy with unease. He wanted his wife back, but his pride could not allow him to admit it. Adora had left their home without any warning. Maybe his mother was right after all. Maybe he needed someone who would know her duty and do it without any complaints, he thought to himself as he convinced himself that he was making the right decision. Without much argument, Olamma moved into his home. She was so hardworking and obedient. She got up early in the morning to clean the house and prepare breakfast for everyone. She even ran his hot bath and took care of his children, who were all dressed early for school. Chijioke could not believe how easy his life had become. Olamma took care of the house without complaining. She even made sure that they ate fresh food every day, and Chijioke could not help but thank his mother for bringing a woman like her into his life. "Mama, I never knew that women like this existed," he said to his mother, who smiled and shook her head. "You see, my son, this is what a proper wife looks like. No shouting, no complaints, just respect and hard work." Chijioke could not contain his joy as he watched Olamma tidy up the living room with a smile on her face. It has been weeks, and Chijioke had made no effort to find his wife Adora. The children were now asking for their mother, and Chijioke informed them that their mother had abandoned them. "Olamma is now your new mother. Treat her as such and stop worrying about your useless mother," Chijioke said to his children, who stared at him in shock. "No!" Chimdi, the youngest child, cried. "Mommy didn't abandon us. She loves us." His older sister Ifunanya folded her arms as she accused her father and grandma of chasing their mother away. Chijioke's heart skipped a beat. His mother scoffed. "What nonsense are these children saying? Your useless mother, left on her own. She was tired of caring for you too because she saw you as a burden. Don't blame me for having a lazy mother," she said as she walked into the kitchen angrily. Olamma, who was standing nearby, forced a smile on her face, but the children did not smile back. They simply turned and walked into their rooms, slamming the door behind them, and for the first time in weeks, Chijioke felt something stir within him. The house was so quiet. Even with Olamma's presence, there was no warmth and laughter. The home that Adora had built was now cold and empty. However, Chijioke still tried to convince himself that everything was fine. One evening, his mother walked out of her room with a pile of clothes. She approached Olamma, who had just finished cleaning the house and preparing a pot of soup and pounded yam. She threw the dirty clothes at Olamma, commanding her to wash and iron the clothes immediately. Olamma froze, her hands clenched at her sides. "Mama," she said, her voice low but firm, "I just finished cooking and cleaning. Can I at least rest for a few minutes?" She asked Mama, who yelled at her angrily, stating that she needed the clothes washed and ironed before evening. Olamma did not utter any word. She took the clothes and strolled to the back of the house, where she piled them on the floor and lit a match, watching as the fire engulfed Mama's clothes. Mama, who was seated in the living room, could perceive the smell of smoke. She went to check what was burning and caught sight of her precious clothes engulfed in flames. Olamma, are you mad? She screamed as Olamma replied her angrily, stating that it was Mama who was mad. Chijioke, who had just returned home from work, froze in shock as he witnessed the chaos unfold before him. His mother was yelling, her face red with rage, whilst Olamma stood firm, her eyes blazing with defiance. What is going on here? Chijioke demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. Mama turned to him, her hand shaking as she pointed at Olamma. This useless village girl burnt my clothes. Can you imagine the insult? Chijioke's gaze shifted to the pile of burnt fabric. He turned to Olamma and asked why she burnt his mother's clothes, and Olamma bursted out in anger. Why is your mother so lazy? Didn't your grandmother teach her anything? She said angrily, as Mama paused in shock, unable to believe what she had just heard. Her mouth flew open. She had never been spoken to like that before. What did you just say? She asked, her voice shaking with anger. Olamma crossed her arms and took a step forward. I called you a lazy old woman because you don't know how to lift a finger. You sit around all day, giving orders, treating everyone like a slave. What kind of a woman gives another woman her dirty panties to wash? Are you not ashamed of yourself? Olamma said to Mama, who could not believe her ears. Chijioke's eyes widened in disbelief. The house, which was once filled with quiet tension, suddenly exploded with chaos. You ungrateful village girl, Mama screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Olamma. How dare you speak to me like that? After everything I did for you? Olamma laughed bitterly. Everything you did for me? You brought me from the village to replace Adora, thinking that I will be your puppet. But I'm done, Mama. I will not be anyone's fool in this house. Mama turned to Chijioke, expecting him to say something. Are you just going to stand there and watch this little girl insult me? Mama asked Chijioke, who remained silent. It was happening again. First, it was Adora, who had suffered under his mother's control. Now, it was Olamma, the village girl who his mother swore would be a better wife. Chijioke, in that moment, realized that the problem had never been Adora. The problem was his mother and himself. Olamma was still fuming. I refuse to waste my life here, running after an old lazy woman who has no value for others. If you want a servant, go and hire one, she said. With that, she stormed into the room and returned minutes later with her bags. I am leaving, she announced, glaring at Chijioke, who she told to find another woman to destroy. Before Mama could say a word, Olamma grabbed her suitcase and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mama collapsed onto the couch, breathing heavily. Chijioke, my son, you must go after her. She cannot just live like that, she said, but Chijioke did not make a move. He stood there frozen as he stared at the door. He had lost Adora, and now Olamma, the woman who he had praised for being so hardworking. For the first time in his life, Chijioke admitted to himself that it was all his fault. He turned to his mother and asked her to leave his house immediately. Whatever you need, Mama, I will send to you. But please, stay away from my matrimonial home, he said to his mother, who sat up in shock. What did you just say? She asked Chijioke, who informed her that she had to leave. You have ruined my home, Mama, and I won't let you ruin my life. Mama gasped. I am your mother, Chijioke. Are you trying to tell me that you are about to choose that ungrateful wife of yours over me? Chijioke let out a bitter laughter. Mama, this is not about choosing. This is about me fixing my life before it's too late. You need to leave, and now. Mama opened her mouth to argue, but something in Chijioke's eyes stopped her. For the first time, she saw a man who was no longer under her control. A man who had finally realized his mistakes and was ready to take responsibility. Without another word, Chijioke turned and walked out of the house. He had to find Adora, but didn't know where to start. Chijioke sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He had no idea where Adora was, but he knew that he had to find her. He drove around, his mind racing, as he thought of where she could be. He arrived her parents' home, but her parents seemed not to know where their daughter had gone. Chijioke was so frustrated. He had pushed Adora away, and now she was nowhere to be found. He spent days looking for her, but his search proved futile. So Chijioke decided to take care of his home and children alone. He cleaned the house, cooked, and ensured that his children were well taken care of. Chijioke could see how difficult it was to manage the house, the children, as well as his job. He barely had time to rest, and every day felt like a never-ending cycle of exhaustion. He woke up early to prepare breakfast, struggled to get the children ready for school, rushed to work, and came back home to clean, cook, and ensure that the children completed their homework. The laundry piled up. The dishes never seemed to end. The house always needed sweeping, and the children constantly needed his attention. For the first time, Chijioke truly understood Adora's struggles. He saw how much she had carried alone, how much she had sacrificed, whilst he dismissed her pain. His children, Chimdi and Ifunanya, barely spoke to him. They missed their mother terribly, and every night, Ifunanya would pray for her safe return. Months passed, and the exhaustion deepened. The house felt emptier without Adora's warmth, and Chijioke wished for a miracle to happen. Just as he sat in his living room alone, his phone rang, and the caller on the other end of the phone revealed something to him that he never saw coming. "This is Dr. Wonsu from St. Mary's Hospital." The woman said. "Your wife Adora is here. She just gave birth." Chijioke's breath caught in his throat. "What?" he whispered, gripping the phone tighter. "Adora, my wife?" "Yes, sir. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy today. The doctor said she has been here for months, under observation due to a high-risk pregnancy." Chijioke's mind reeled. His hands began to shake. "She was pregnant?" he asked. Yes, the doctor confirmed. She checked herself into the hospital when she found out about the pregnancy. She said that she could not afford any form of stress. That was why she left. Chijioke felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. All this time, Adora hadn't left because she wanted to abandon them. She had left to protect herself and their unborn child. Regret hit him like a hammer. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and raced to the hospital. When he arrived, he rushed through the doors, his heart pounding in his chest. The nurse directed him to Adora's room, where he saw his wife Adora lying on the hospital bed, her face pale but peaceful. In her arms, she held their son, who was wrapped in a blue blanket. Tears welled up in his eyes as he approached them slowly. Adora looked up at him, her eyes unreadable. "Chijioke," she said softly as Chijioke fell to his knees and began to plead for forgiveness. She watched him silently. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't know you were going through this alone." Adora sighed, looking down at the sleeping baby in her arms. "You never listened, Chijioke. I was tired. I was drowning, and I knew that if I stayed, I wouldn't survive this pregnancy." Tears slipped down Chijioke's face. He reached out to her, pleading for her to come back home. Adora stared at him and asked what kind of home she would be coming back to. One where she's unappreciated? One where she has to fight for help while he scrolls through his phone? One where his mother sits like a queen while she runs around like a slave? "No," Chijioke said firmly. "Mama is gone. I asked her to leave, and I have changed, Adora. These months without you have opened my eyes. I've been doing everything you used to do, and I now understand how much you carried alone. I am sorry, Adora. I failed you, and I want to make it right." Adora studied him for some seconds. She could not risk returning back to the chaotic life that had once been her nightmare. She gave Chijioke a condition to hire a housekeeper first before she returned home, and Chijioke, without thinking twice, nodded in agreement. Adora sighed as she looked down at her newborn baby, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I will come home, Chijioke, but I need to see proof that life for me would be seamless. I want a housekeeper hired before I step my foot into that house. However, before that, I want you to handle the house and the children by yourself for another month without complaining. I need to know that you understand what it means to care for a home before I return. Chijioke's throat tightened. A whole month? He thought about the long nights of exhaustion, the endless chores, the demands of two children who still missed their mother. He had barely survived the past few months as it was. But then he looked at Adora, tired but yet strong. This was a woman who had carried their family for years without help, a woman who had nearly died because of the stress that she endured, and Chijioke knew better than to argue. Adora could finally see something in him that she had longed for years, his humility. The next day, as Chijioke left the hospital, he went straight to hire a housekeeper who was to resume in a month's time. He stayed alone and cared for the home and children for another 1 month, and for the first time, Chijioke understood that managing a home was not just a woman's duty but a full-time responsibility that required teamwork. When the months passed, Adora finally returned home with their newborn son in her arms. The children ran to her, hugging her tightly as they welcomed her back home. The housekeeper was already there, taking care of the chores as Chijioke stood by the door, happy to have his wife back home. Adora looked around. The house was spotless, the children happy, and for the first time, she saw her husband as a partner, not just a man who expected everything to be done for him. That was how Chijioke learned a very valuable lesson: not to undermine the struggles of others. The lesson to be learned from this story is that marriage is a partnership that requires teamwork, empathy, and shared responsibilities. Pride, neglect, and external interference can destroy a home, whilst listening, respect, and mutual support strengthens it. Women should not be overburdened with household duties alone, and seeking help is not a sign of weakness. Managing a home can be so demanding, so we should always try to be helpful however we can, than try to undermine the efforts of others. I hope you enjoyed the story.